attention, please. My name is Paul Massey, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the 18th induction to the New England Antique Auto Races Hall of Fame. Before we begin, however, I'd like to make a little bit of an announcement. We have 3 board members who will not be seeking re-election and have been working with NAIR for a long, long time. Al Feeney, President. Al. Rhonda Blanchett, who's the Treasurer. And Bill Henry, who's the current Vice President, is where? Is he around the corner, maybe? Okay, this happens to be for prayer today, the week that we honor veterans. People who are currently in the military. I know Jim Williams is here, who's currently in the military. I don't know if there's anybody else, man and woman, who is currently serving our country. I'm not going to ask anyone to stand up who has served their country, because racing people seem to all have been in the Marines. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. But we'll ask you to stand for the prayer if you can. If you cannot stand, remain seated. Sarah, my granddaughter, will sing the national anthem, and she's going to sing God Bless America, which is a chorus, so everybody can join in. So please stand. Let us pray. We are here today to honor people, legends, people who have made our sport what it is today. However, keeping in mind that many, many conflicts happened before racing really took off after World War II. So let's pause for a second and remember and honor those veterans, men and women who gave their lives and their time and their effort and for their families. Lord, we ask you to bless us today. It gives us an opportunity to renew old friendships, make new ones. It's wonderful when you meet people that you never met before. And it's great to see old friends get together. We ask you to bless them. We ask you to bless us, all of us who are here today, our ride here and our ride home later. And there are still some people who would like to be here today but could not and cannot for different reasons. And I think of Rachel as one. So we pause for a moment and pray for them. We ask you, dear Lord, to bless our food, our company, those sitting on our table. We ask you to bless those who wait on table and those who have prepared the food. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Sarah?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my own sweet home. God bless America, my own sweet home.
Please be seated. It's time to enjoy our meal. Thank you.
As Paul introduced me, I'm Al Feeney. I'm proud to be president, and just welcome the members of the class of 2014, all the Hall of Fame members that are in attendance, all family, friends, and fans. Today we are proud to honor these 11 men as they join the 196 of New England's outstanding racing personalities into the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. I congratulate you on this achievement, and I hope you take advantage of all the benefits of being a member of this Hall of Fame, and I hope to see you all at future inductions. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Buckler, our Master of Ceremonies for today's events. We have a bit busy, as Matt comes up, the schedule is that we're eating our salad and et cetera, and at the next break we'll be served an entree, and we'll return to the table to the program at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Al, and we'd like to welcome everybody here to Meneley's Banquet Facility for the 18th time. We are ready for the New England Racing Hall of Fame. A little sad to find out that Al Feeney is stepping down because he has served this banquet and the NEAR organization well, not for just one term, but for 2 tenures. And Al, a great job as always, and I think today this full house is a testimony to what you have done. Now we are going to start by taking an informal poll. How many are here for the first time at a NEAR dinner? How many yellow stripes do we have on the back of the chairs? A lot. How many have been here for every dinner? A lot. So we would like to welcome the veterans and the rookies. This is my favorite dinner of the year for one reason. It is an afternoon of greatness. And we are going to prove to you right now how great it is. Will the past inductees of the Hall of Fame please stand up? This is what it's all about. Our past honorees, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you sit, you are not far away from a Hall of Fame. And we would especially like to welcome 2 people who are here from our first class in 1998, Buck Stevens and Ron Bouchard. And also 2 members who are at the class of 1999, our second class, Billy Greco and Eddie West. And they have been here for a lot of dinners. Let's put our foot on the gas pedal and get started. Our first presentation will be the Mitch Arata Media Award. I'm sure everybody at one time or another in their lives have kept a scrapbook. And we decided it was appropriate to have an award dedicated to the people who wrote the articles and took the pictures and in many cases did the announcing to keep the history of motorsports alive. To make this year's presentation, the man who won it last year. He covered his first race back in 1973 in Pocono. It was known as a Schaefer 500, and he was so taken back by that race, he is still one of the few people who drink Schaefer to this day. Pete Vanderveer.
Yes, I was around in 1973. Thank God I'm still here today. First of all, congratulations to the 2015 inductees, Hall of Fame inductees. Enjoy this day. I know for most of you, or all of you, it's a very special moment. in your racing career and in your life. The second job I have today is to introduce a gentleman that all of you know very well. Mark Bones Bercier is our 2015 Jack Rada Charlie Mitchell Memorial Award winner. Some of the events fade into memory, others remain close to your visual surface. While I'm not exactly certain of the year, I do remember the time and place. It was a Friday night, and for me, a regular assignment of covering stock car racing at Stafford Motor Speedway for the Norwich Bulletin. As I entered the press box, I noticed this kid, a teenager I guess, sitting next to Speedway scene owner and publisher Val Lesor. What initially struck in my mind about this young fellow was his long hair. Other than saying hello and sharing a few words, there were very few other significant details which stood out about the evening. That young person appeared to me as just another erstwhile writer hoping to catch on in the game. It didn't take long, however, to realize that Mark Bones Bercier had a special talent, a skill not found in every individual who tries to gather together words and phrases about auto racing in order to present them to the reading public. His work on Val's paper would only be the gateway to what would be a lengthy and award-winning career as a motorsports journalist. It would lead him to Trackside Magazine in a partnership with Dean Nardi, then to Stock Car Racing, where he produced craftily written pieces and columns for its editor, Dr. Dick Berggren. It was followed by a stint with Dick Berggren's Stock Car Racing magazine. What came along next was an explosion in print. Bones was able to take local racing figures like Bugsy Stevens, Richie Evans, Ed Flemke Sr., and Bentley Warren, and bring you along for a ride in a lengthy journey about their lives in book form for Coastal Racing 181 and its owner, Lou Boyd. Anyone who's ever tackled that endeavor understands what an enduring and sometimes agonizing task it can be. He has also chronicled the lives of national personalities like Parnelli Jones, Tony Stewart, and Bill Simpson. Hours of interviewing and the vast collection of facts and research are needed to prepare each work. After that, you have to think about the writing. What makes Bones Bercier one of the quintessential chroniclers of auto racing, of the auto racing world, is that the rare ability to put you right there. He paints those precise word pictures. He makes you hear the roar of the engines, the smell of the exhaust fumes. You can't help but feel the excitement. Over the years, Bones has also developed into not only a powerful interviewer, but an extraordinary editor as well. That isn't easy in a sport where your ego, at times, can get the best of you. But Bones has always been able to surrender that for the greater good of what he does. I turn to an old friend, Pete Zanardi, as I often do in times like these, for a few chosen words, and here's what he had to say about Bones. Clearly, when it comes to New England auto racing writers, he's at the head of the field, says Zanardi, a Hall of Famer and someone who's written a share of great stories. He's the best we've had. Bones has a wonderful feeling for the sport and its history. Even though he has gone out and become nationally known, he's never forgotten his roots, where he comes from. This award is long overdue, and that time is now. It's my ultimate pleasure introducing to you the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame's 2015 Jack Rada Charlie Mitchell Memorial Award winner, recipient, Mr. Bones Bercier.
Thanks, Pete. First of all, I knew both Jack Rada and Charlie Mitchell pretty well. They were two very different people. Jack was a fun guy to have a cold drink and a story with, and that's for me, I'm busy. Charlie Mitchell was a very quiet guy who was also a fun guy to sit and tell stories with. The best thing about both of them was that they knew how to tell a story. And to win anything with their name on it is a great honor. I need to thank just a couple of people. Mike Ediscavage, who's not here today, who's a great photographer and writer, lives in California now. He gave me my first writing job when I was 15 years old, so you can blame him for this. Probably 90% of the writing I've done over the years has gone to either Val Lasser in the Speedway Scene Days or to Dick Berggren at his various magazines, and both of those guys have been bosses and mentors to me, but most of all friends, and that's really important. Carl Fredrickson at Speedway Illustrated I've been writing for the past few years. It's a great magazine, probably does more for short track racing than any other national magazine. Lou Boyd and his wife Carrie from Coastal 181. I think everybody in this room knows the work that they do with the books on racing past and present, and I think that it's incredible what they've done with a small publishing company out of a little corner of Massachusetts has become a national concern. Two people who have always encouraged me, I don't know why, but from the time I was maybe 15 years old and started doing this, who are here today, Bruce Cohen and Margaret Rosati. I don't know why they did it, but they've always been super encouraging to me. In April of 1974, I was 13 years old. I picked up a copy of Stock Car Racing magazine. It had a story written by a friend of us all, Pete Zanardi, about a guy who was another friend of us all, Richie Evans. And most of the stories that you read would talk about where a guy started. He started in street stocks and he drove late models or modifieds or whatever it was, told you where he was from, but it didn't tell you much about the guy and the life that he led. Well, this story opened up in a smoky bar in Rome, New York, and he had Richie playing some kind of an electronic paddleball game, which we used to call it Pong, maybe the first video game ever. I was 13 years old, so I'd never been in a bar room, but I had an idea what they looked like from watching movies and TV, and you could, when you read this story, you could smell the smoke and smell the stale beer almost, and it let me know right then that being a writer, you could bring to the reader the lives of these interesting people. And that story absolutely changed my life. So Pete, I don't know where you're sitting, but I absolutely owe all this to you. And then lastly, the two most important women in my life are here. Both of them are Linda Vaughn. And only the men here will get that. But my mother, who took me to my very first race at Plainville Stadium, which was won by Dave Alkis, who's here today, and my wife, Dory. I've written 5 books, or 10 books now, and she's been here for 5 of them, which is a new track record. And I don't have any plan B, so she's going to have to be it. But anyway, thank you very much for this. It means the world. And congratulations to all the Hall of Famers.
Well, we are lucky that the first writer that Mark Bones Boussier read was Pete Zanardi, and not somebody like Hugh Hefner, or the whole racing industry never would have been the same. When I think of the New England Antique Racers, I think of one man. He was the engine that drove this organization for many years, Danny Pardee. And to honor his memory, every year we pass out the Dan Pardee Award. So here to make the presentation, Pete Zanardi and Marie Pardee.
First of all, I'd have picked you, Hefner. Danny Pardee, we came up with this award because we want this name to last forever. And we came up with this award because what NEAR is about, what the Hall of Fame is about dedication. It doesn't work. It doesn't work unless you have people really, really dedicated to making it work. But Danny was famous for a million one-liners. I'm sure everybody knows how funny he was. Making fun of himself and making fun of everybody that he could see or touch. But Danny was extremely dedicated. He tolerated no fools when it came to this organization. When it came to, this is what it was about. You did the job, you shut up, so, and that's what we honor, and that's what we look for when we present this thing. I think you could look in the book and see the people who have won it before, and you can see examples of that. Without further ado, Mr. MC, you are the winner of the Danny Pardee Award. Really a smart guy and dedicated. He just don't know who he is or where he is.
No, Pete, I thought you said Ed C. I was waiting for him to come up. Danny Pardee was a friend of mine. This is one of the best awards I've ever received. I remember him too, and to get something with his name on it is something I'll treasure for the rest of my life. Thank you. Well, Pete Zanardi just did the impossible. You made me speechless for a few moments. But I will make a habit of it because we have a very important presentation coming up. The Veterans Committee does a great job. It honors the competitors who competed back in the 40s and the 50s and beyond. And we wanted to make sure that their accomplishments and their achievements never went through the cracks and they got the recognition that they deserve. Our first presenter, one of the great voices of New England auto racing, he's the voice of the name of midgets and has been around the sport his entire life. Pete Falcone.
Thank you for that gracious introduction, Matt. The next Shirley Temple's on me. I'm going to tell a story today because I'll bet that about 99% of us in this room were born or brought up in this sport, and we all had a racing hero that influenced along the way. I'm thrilled to be presenting my lifelong racing hero, a guy by the name of Fred Borden. It's hard to believe that such a quiet, unassuming guy, a welder by trade, could be such a champion-winning race car driver in an era of strong-willed, tough guy, wheel wrestling drivers. Starting out when stock cars were stealing the thunder from the midgets at local short tracks, especially in New England, this guy, Freddie Borden, was proving to be a natural. Legend has it that almost immediately he was dominating the jalopy divisions at long-gone tracks northwest of Boston. In fact, he won so many races at the old Medford Bowl, they put a bounty on his head. It was there in the early 50s that he caught the eye of champion engine builder and Hall of Famer Bill Welch. Welchie and Dave Morton had been building some of the more potent flatheads of the day, and one of those engines was in my father's cup down that had its seat coming open due to the retirement of the great Joe Ross. Borden agreed to come aboard near Hall of Famer John Falcone's red number 10, and this relatively unknown driver from Waltham, Mass, would join the premier divisions, or the premier division at tracks like Norwood, Westboro, Peabody, and Lonsdale. Top 5 finishes were almost immediate, and victories weren't far behind. In the late 50s, when my father gave up his cars in favor of promoting the races at Westboro, Thompson, Peabody, and Brookline, New Hampshire, Freddie took rides in cars fielded by Marty Hardy and a somewhat thought to be radical at the time creation by Andy Smith from the North Shore of Massachusetts. Car actually that Jimmy Martell ended up owning and racing, who's going into the Hall of Fame today. Freddie won in those cars too. In the winter of 1962, he was asked to return to the familiar Falcone red number 10, this time in a Morton Welch flathead-powered full coupe at Westboro and Brookline, built by the next generation, my older brother, Rick Falcone, and a crew of his high school buddies. On opening night, April 21st, 1962, was his first test in this new car. He finished second to Seekonk ace Dee Castell, who's going into the Hall of Fame today, who was running Westboro until the conch opened for the season. But Freddie won the next week and kept on winning and winning at Westboro and Brookline. More features than anyone else at both places in 1962. 28 features in 1963. 17 out of 25 in another season. Before he was done, he'd won the Class A championship in 1962, 63, 65, 66, and 67. Missing only the 1964 season when a business obligation kept him out. Hall of Famer Reino Tolonen subbed for him that year and kept up the tradition by winning the most features and the championship in Borden's regular ride. In the season of 1967, when the flatheads were gone and the cars were overhead powered, chopped and channeled again, he had a couple of bad crashes. One due to a stuck throttle and another in a multi-car pileup. But through late night efforts by himself and Rick's crew, they were back the next Saturday night. And they were back in victory lane, winning 10 features in 20 starts that year. but the clock was ticking. And at the young age of 12, I remember very vividly overhearing a conversation between Freddie and Bill Welch late in the 1967 season. Freddie said that the cars were going faster, but his reaction time was not. And he said, quote, "I'm going to get done at the end of the season." Well, I was devastated. I just heard my hero say he was hanging it up. He collected the Champions Trophy again and at that fall banquet, putting another mark on his accomplished record. And then he faded away. All those championships and all those wins, in fact, more wins at Westboro Speedway than anyone else, a record that stood right through the track's closing in 1985. Now, you never saw him at the track after that, and I don't know how much he followed racing from then on, but I know that in the late 90s, he was having lunch at a popular place on the seacoast of New Hampshire, and he overheard a conversation between a racing newspaper writer and a fan about guys that were winning at local tracks. Uncharacteristically, Freddie spoke up and told him that he was pretty good in his day and proceeded to tell the story, but I'm sure not as detailed as I've told it today. He was invited by the writer to go to a race at Lee, New Hampshire. I was working there as the announcer and was summoned to the press box to, quote, see someone I knew. And when I finally made it over there, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was my hero. And after all these years, I finally got to talk to him, man to man, asked him a million questions during a conversation that I never wanted to end. 40 years had passed, and he was still humble and almost unaccepting of the accolades that I poured on him because of his accomplishments. Gushing about him to the other members of the press in the room. I'm sure I embarrassed him, but hey, this was my hero I was talking about. The guy I watched slice through the field almost stealth-like, coming from the back week after week. Then take that victory lap with the checkered flag around the ovals probably 100 times. And now, one more accomplishment, and maybe the biggest of all. My hero, and more importantly, one of New England's best race drivers, is going into the near Hall of Fame. And that is the great Freddie Borden. Freddie couldn't be with us today. He lives in Florida these days and unable to make the trip, but a good member of his family are here to accept the award, and I'd like to introduce his daughter Diane to accept the Hall of Fame award for Fred Borden.
Thank you. First of all, Peter, this wasn't going to be this hard till after you got up and spoke. And I thank you very much for that, for bringing back all the memories. I enjoyed it. And I want to say congratulations to all the previous Hall of Famers. And I'd like to congratulate those coming in today, of course, especially my father. He couldn't be here, but he made sure that I had some words to say from him. I'm sorry I cannot be here. Of all places I would like to be is here at this time. But due to medical needs, it's impossible. So I've asked my daughter Diane to speak for me. I want to thank all of you who were involved in making this honor happen, and to have it happen while I'm still around to receive it. If it weren't for Peter Falcone, Ricky Falcone, and the Falcone brothers, this would not be happening. So I say thank you to everyone for this honor of becoming a part of the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. Thank you all very much for this.
He's a 20-year business partner of Briggs Cunningham III, and I think the interesting thing about him, he was a Class C AMA expert motorcycle rider. And despite that background, he can still walk up to the stage and make the presentation. Larry Black.
I want to thank your fine organization for honoring Briggs Cunningham today. It's a great pleasure for me to say a few words about Briggs Swift Cunningham II, a man who's been a hero of mine since I was about 7 years old. My father had a close friend at the Grumman Aircraft factory that ran their wind tunnel. And he gave me one of the 2 wind tunnel models of Mr. Cunningham's Le Monstre 1950 Le Mans race car for my birthday in 1955. The other wind tunnel model was kept by Phil Walters, another near Hall of Fame inductee. I treasured that wooden car, and it caused me to follow every Cunningham exploit from then on. Mr. Cunningham was a great role model to have as a kid. He was why I wanted to be a racer. Many years later, still enthralled over Mr. Cunningham's accomplishments, I partnered with his son, Briggs III, an American racing icon himself, in an effort to bring a legitimate American Grand Touring car to the world marketplace. Mr. C's influence was felt deeply throughout that effort. Your honoree, Briggs Cunningham, was, and to some extent still is, a very famous man. Unfortunately, fame itself is not so unusual anymore. There are many famous now. Some become famous overnight for no discernible reason at all. So fame has become almost common and reduced in value. As a result, Briggs's fame may not seem all that important to some anymore. That is a true loss to our culture. Today's famous people are all too often very poor role models. Not Briggs. One very prominent person once said that Briggs was a man, and I quote, about whom no one has ever had a bad word to say. The author of that obviously went to great lengths to avoid dangling a participle. They also went to great lengths to tell the truth about Briggs. Unlike the fleetingly famous, Briggs Cunningham was a true role model. He is celebrated for his accomplishments, his sterling character, and his deep commitment to sportsmanship. He embodied the very spirit of sportsmanship. A handshake was a binding contract for him, and his word was good enough for anyone. As to the scale of his fame, in the 1950s, it was a powerful signal to us all when someone appeared on the front cover of Time magazine. There's a funny story that comes from that Time magazine feature article in 1954. The writer was impressed with the scale of Mr. C's race team operation. It looked like motorsports had earned Briggs a small fortune, and the writer asked how he had done that, how he had accumulated this small fortune. Briggs' simple and deeply funny answer was, start with a large one. Others have used that line since. His legacy is enduring, and it has endured because the Cunningham team absolutely dominated road racing in America from its beginnings in the early 1950s, well into the 60s. The legacy is endured because there are substantial institutions that benefited from his guidance and support at their foundation and in their formative years. In the automotive world, Briggs was largely responsible for the founding and the success of the Sports Car Club of America. I don't think a lot of people realize that. The Pebble Beach Concourse, he was one of the three founders of that event. Watkins Glen, Lime Rock, and Sebring, and in a broader sense, the entire sport of road racing. He was the father of road racing in America, and he was a good father. He never sought credit. In fact, he preferred being an unseen force for good. Many of Briggs's accomplishments are so deeply ingrained in America's motorsports culture that we fail to realize that they belong to him. One example is his creating the first American sports car, and with it establishing the enduring definition of what an American sports car is. Some will be surprised by that. The American sports car, most of us could agree, is a large displacement V8 high output front engine roadster. This template was not pioneered by the Corvette, and certainly by Shelby's Cobra. The Cunningham C2R and C4Rs were and are the template and inspiration that every American sports car has followed since Briggs first built them in 1950 and 51. In later life, Shelby did admit this to some insiders, but Zora Duntov, that's the Corvette guy, Zora Duntov was willing to credit him for the inspiration far earlier than old Shell was. As to how good those early 1950s Cunninghams were, bear in mind that it wasn't until the 427 Cobra was introduced in 1965 that a Shelby car could outperform of the Cunningham C4. That was more than 14 years later. The Cunningham C4 was only 2,400 pounds wet had a 400 horsepower Weber carbureted Hemi. So you do the math. Sorry, I don't do this for a living. I build cars. But there's more. Here's a partial, and I stress partial, list of other smaller Cunningham innovations and accomplishments. 1, the first racing team from any country with in-car radio communication to their drivers was Cunningham. The first American team with a portable machine shop in a truck at the track was Cunningham. He imported the first Ferrari into the United States. He was the Jaguar and Maserati distributor for the United States. And as slight and as insignificant as it may seem, the racing stripe. There's a story about that last one. I guess that most people think that we've always had racing stripes, but that's not remotely true. It used to be that race cars competing internationally were required to be painted in colors assigned by national origin. French cars were blue, English cars were green, Germans were silver, and what few American cars racing in Europe there were painted white with blue frame rails. Remember that frame rails used to be visible on open-wheel cars, like the sprint car out front. The first envelope body American cars to compete in Europe were Cunningham's, and their envelope body hid the frame rails. Briggs's solution was to paint 2 broad stripes the length of the white bodies, hence racing stripes. Pretty soon everyone adopted Briggs's innovation and the color scheme became America's official racing colors. Years later, Shelby reversed Briggs's colors and painted his team cars blue with white racing strips. As to Mr. Cunningham's character, which he was also famous for, one anecdote expresses it perfectly. You may know that Briggs was the world's most accomplished sailor and won the America's Cup in 1958. Long before Dale Earnhardt, it was said that Briggs could see air, which is really helpful in sailing. You may also wonder where he found the time to do that while dominating automobile road racing, but I digress. The story goes that Briggs's boat, the Columbia, so outclassed the British finalists that Briggs offered to swap boats with the Brits. Perhaps it's hard to believe that that offer was altruistic, that it was sincere, but it was. All he wanted was for the competition to be fair. That's Briggs Cunningham. That sort of sportsmanship has been long missing in our world. We miss Mr. Cunningham, and I am so glad that you guys honor him today. Thank you. And John McKinney, which is Briggs's grandson, was not able to attend today, so I guess I'm making the presentation of the award to myself.
You know, isn't that kind of neat, being on the cover of Time magazine? Today, people think it's a big deal just to get featured on GoDaddy.com. Well, Briggs did a lot better than that. Our next presenter is a native of Vermont. He went to his first race back in 1947. He was involved in building Thunder Road and various speedways. He's been not only a track builder, a car builder, he has been involved in the sport in many capacities. Lloyd Hutchins Jr. Here he is from the rear of the field to the finish line, Lloyd Hutchins.
I'm not a gifted speaker. I don't get up in front of groups very often. I do a lot better one-on-one, particularly with the ladies. I had to take care of that on the way up. Thank you, Darla. I have been involved with the selection committee of the Hall of Fame for several years now. And I always like to see some of my heroes go in, be accepted into the Hall of Fame. And one that I've had interest in for several years is Roy Pappy Forsythe. Now, he was Pappy was racing in the late 30s on the ice. Took time off for World War II, as many of our heroes did. And then when he returned, he got out an old Ford, which were a lot of them around in those days because automobiles had not been available, new ones, during the war. After the war, everybody got a new car, and all these old cars were parked out behind the sheds, and jalopy racing was born. And Pappy raced mostly in the southern Connecticut Valley, and he had championships Claremont and Keene, New Hampshire at Cheshire Fairgrounds. And in 1952, I believe, they formed a new racing association which included 4 tracks: Claremont, Keene, West Brattleboro, and Rhythm Inn in Massachusetts. And they raced one of them on Friday night, one on Thursday night, one on Saturday night, and one on Sunday. So it was a real busy schedule. And Forsyth was elected the first president of this organization. Now in 1952, prior to that, Forsyth had been racing up in Vermont. He was racing in Colchester at Mallett's Bay Speedway, which was a 5th-mile dirt track. He won the race that day, and the announcer at the track was a young fellow about 16 years old. His name was Kenley Dean Squire, and this is where Forsyth met Ken Squire. So when Forsyth became president of this new racing association, he called Ken and he said, "Hey kid, would you like a job? We need an announcer at 4 tracks." And Forsyth had privately said to someone else, he said, "This kid is so damn good that he could make a race sound exciting with just 2 wheelbarrows." He said, "We've got to give this kid a chance." And that launched a career that everyone in this room has heard about. Anyway, we started Thunder Road. We opened Thunder Road in 1960. Our first king of the road was a fellow out of Bethlehem, New Hampshire, known as Ronnie Marvin. And of course, most everyone that raced in those days, Squire always put a moniker on him, and he became known as Ronnie Bethlehem Bombshell Marvin, and he was our first king of the road. So Barber and Forsyth had retired from racing about 3-4 years prior to that. So Squire called Barber and asked him to put a car together to come up run on asphalt, because he'd always run on dirt previous to that, and so hadn't Forsyth. But anyway, Ken says to me, he says, "You know George pretty well, why don't you give him a call and see if he'll put a car together?" So we did, and for the 61 season, Barber was also in our Hall of Fame, and Forsyth came to Thunder Road, and out of 18 features, they won 10 of them. And those were in the days where handicapping, if you won, you always started in the rear. He won 5 features consecutively, and it's a record that still stands today. So it's with great honor and pride that I'm able to induct and present a hero of mine into the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. And here to accept this presentation is a young fellow. His name is Russell Perkins, and Russell's dad, Walter, was Forsyth's best friend and was his pit crew quite often in the early days. Thank you.
When Lloyd is back now to socialize and working his magic with the ladies, but not before he inducts Pappy Forsyth into the Hall of Fame. So it is dinner time. So hopefully everybody is enjoying themselves so far. And we come back, we're going to meet 8 very special people, and 8 people who have one thing in common. They're larger than life. Enjoy your dinner.
We're running a little bit behind in schedule, but don't worry, we'll give you plenty of time to eat, and we'll give you plenty of notice when we call you back for the second session. Enjoy your meal. Thank you.
Okay, we are ready for our restart. As the yellow flag is going to be put away, and we are ready to meet our Hall of Fame inductees for 2014. Before we begin, we have to take roll call. And let's start, go from north to south. How many people are here from Maine? Okay, we have what about New Hampshire? Oh, we have a handful. How many people from Vermont are here? Oh, I know we have at least one. How many people from Massachusetts? Okay, a big turnout. How many Rhode Island people are here? How many people are from Connecticut? And how many people can't wait for this dinner to get over so they can go back to Florida? Yeah, the biggest cheer of all. What we are going to do for the next couple of hours, turn back the clock. What about New York? What about Boston Spa, New York?
I hate to interrupt, but Steve Kennedy, the photographer, just pointed out something to me. So when the show is over, and we want the group pictures, the class of 2014, and all the Hall of Famers. Normally it's done up here. We don't have enough room, so we're going to all go to what I consider the south end of the building, and that's where the main pictures will be taken at the end of the presentation. So we'll look to see all the Hall of Fame members at that end of the building. Thank you.
Okay, that's the south end of the building, which is almost so far away. It seems like Boston Spa, New York, but not quite. Now, our format today for all our presenters and our inductees. After our inductees makes their speech, they'll go to the front, have their picture taken with the presenter, and then the presenter and the inductee will walk over, put their plaque on our Wall of Fame, and that is how a person officially gets inducted into the Hall of Fame. Before we start, we have this disclaimer. The staff and management of the New England Antique Racers is not responsible for the claims, the stories, and the tall tales you will hear for the next 2 hours. Believe them at your own risk. So we are ready to get the show started. Our first presenter, he writes a great column, a great historian of motorsports, involved in it, especially at the Waterford Speedway for a long time. His column, Racing with Time, it tells us some great memories about stuff that we remember, and also about stuff that we wish we could remember, but we only know about it by reading his column. Here is Dave Dykes.
Hi folks, glad to see you all here today. The guy that I'm going to be telling you about here really meant a lot to me during my early years as a racing fan. I grew up at the Waterford Speedway, and of course before I could drive, actually the only way I had learning about other drivers and other tracks was going to Shaney's souvenir stand, picking up cavalcade of auto racing, speedway scene, whom I later worked for, by the way. And during this period in the 70s, there was a Connecticut driver that really stood out. This guy was running at Stafford, Thompson, Plainville, Riverside Park, and occasionally Waterford. He was winning a bunch of features. He was kind of photogenic too. 2 things stood out about the guy to this young race fan. He had these really cool 70s pork chop sideburns, kind of like Elvis. And he was always smiling to the camera and looking like he was having a great time. That guy was modified racer Ronnie Wyckoff. Many years later, when I was writing a Speedbowl column for Hall of Famer Val Lasour's Speedway Scene, and Waterford Media Director, Hall of Famer, and my close friend Pete Zanardi was patiently trying to teach me how to string a sentence together, I got to meet Ronnie. You see, at the time, Waterford had kind of become a Saturday night destination for former modified drivers, many of which are Hall of Famers, to hang out, socialize, and catch some racing. Ronnie was one of those guys. After we became friendly, I learned that there's a few other things that stand out about Ronnie in addition to the ever-present grin and those former sideburns. He's very, very humble about his career. In talking with him, you'd never think he even won a feature, much less multiple Riverside 500 team races, the crown jewel of the once powerful United Stock Car Racing Club. Taking checkers at a tough joint like Plainville Stadium was never a cakewalk either. Just ask any of the stadium alumni that are here today. Any one of boatload of those features. Stafford and Thompson are also on his resume, and there were great runs at high-speed away venues like Trenton, Martinsville, and Pocono. When you talk to the guys he ran against weekly, you hear things like you never had to worry about Ronnie, you could run wheel to wheel with him for laps, and Ronnie was just a good racer and a good person, never had an issue with him. Those comments from fellow competitors say a whole lot about how he conducted his racing. His talent proven, Ronnie never had to search for a ride either, and was sought out by some of the best teams in the business to wheel their equipment. Perhaps it's our friend, celebrated writer Bones Boissiere, that best sums up Ronnie's career. He recently had this to say: Ronnie Wyckoff became one of my first modified heroes, if not the very first, for a very simple reason. As a kid, I waved to him from the fence at Plainville Stadium, and he waved back. He was on the front straightaway, strapped into a coupe, ready to run his heat race. But he seemed to realize that this was an important moment to that young kid at the fence. Now, waving to a kid doesn't get a guy into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame, but it goes a long way toward turning casual fans into serious fans. And it has kept Ronnie Wyckoff in my personal Hall of Fame for more than 40 years. To me, Ronnie Wyckoff was the embodiment of the short track racer in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He worked a full-time job all week, then on the weekends he packed up his helmet and his uniform and he went racing. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost, but come Monday morning he was going to start the whole cycle again, go to work, put in his hours, and wait until Saturday night when once again he'd become a stock car hero. Guys like him were the bedrock of this sport. The stats prove that Ronnie Wyckoff won a ton of feature races during what many consider the true golden era of New England modified racing, all while remaining liked and trusted by his fellow competitors and the teams that he drove for. As for the fans and media, and this is an important one, folks, he was always accessible, win, lose, or draw. And he always did it with a smile, and it simply doesn't get any better than that in this game. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Ronnie Wyckoff, one of our region's best modified racers, into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame today.
Well, I want to thank everybody here that came here to see what's going on. And I'll tell you what, I loved racing no matter where I was going, whether it was Plainville, Riverside, or wherever it was. But I had a lot of fun, met a lot of good people, and fans and everything. So I had many good times, some bad times too, but I mean, that's part of the way it goes. I don't know what else to say, but I mean, even like Riverside Park, we had the team races and stuff like that, and drove for a bunch of good people and with a lot of good drivers and stuff. We had a lot of fun back when it wasn't a lot of money to go racing either, not like today's days. My goodness. Thank you all very much, and it was good many times.
One more.
You know, you're my age. There was one of your first heroes right there, Ronnie Wyckoff. Now, if you went to the track and the announcers didn't show up, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if the starter didn't show up, it would be chaotic. One of the best starters in the business is our next presenter. He has been around for a long time. His father was a starter, and this year at Waterford, he paid tribute to his dad by wearing a shirt and tie the way they used to do it back in the old days. One of the most entertaining starters around, Steve Grant.
Today I'm here to induct Deke Estelle Sr. into the Hall of Fame. I am truly disappointed that he couldn't make it here today, but he did leave me a note to read to his fellow friends and competitors. I am humbled by be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Thank you for the committee who saw fitting to include me in such a great elite group. Many are my friends and former competitors. We raced in an era where it was fun on and off the track. Congratulations to all this year's inductees. All the best, Deke. Thank you. I really am disappointed that he's not here. He's one of my best friends in life. I knew him since I was a kid when he was my idol and we were neighbors. I grew up with his kids. And in 1953, the Astor Racing family, as is known as Seekonk Speedway, was born. Deke drove 27 holes down to the old Ponte Delgado. He drove it there 6 miles, and that started his racing career. It was a straight 8-cylinder that had a crack the length of the block, and that started his race. He's tried Kingston and Lonsdale before. Seekonk Speedway became his home track. By the mid-60s, racing was incredible. I mean, as a kid, and us kids and fans, we were spoiled to see that Hall of Fame races were happening. When I look back, every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon, we saw Hall of Fame racing that we took for granted. It was fun. We had personalities back then as race car drivers that were bigger than the race itself. And as kids, we saw something happen, we'd jump into the pits to see what was breaking out, or even the wives were arguing out in the stands. It was great. The places were packed everywhere we went. We were blessed with that as kids, and it'll never be the same. But Deke in the mid-60s was coming into his own, becoming a track champion amongst Hall of Famers. And I'm sitting alongside Ron Bouchard, who said as a kid, Deke Estelle was his idol, along with Judge Summers and Buck Stevens. So he was in an era where if you won, and as all of you know, you did something great, and Deke won a lot. He had 28 victories at the Seekonk Speedway, but then he started spreading out where tracks wanted to hold you back and try to hold you, because it was long before the tours happened, where the track didn't want to lose a star to another track, so they tried to hold you back. He's won at the high banks of a real tight place at the Westboro Speedway with the Falcone family, Lee, Star Speedway. Before he started to really get into the dirt side, he wanted to experiment with dirt. Langhorne and Nazareth, and he's won at Lebanon Valley, the high banks there. I asked him, hey Deke, what's your biggest win? He said, they're all good. You know, I raced against people and we had fun. He said he was there to make money. He built cars in a 10-by-20 garage where not a lot of people could help him because there was no room for anybody in there but him, and he certainly liked things his own way. As a kid, if we were in that garage, he'd say, hey boy, and everybody who knows Deke, he had some one-liners. One of them was, hey boy, you're gonna hang around, you're gonna stand or clean. Otherwise, get out of the garage. That was a Saturday morning. Or he saw a nice car come in, he'd go up to the guy and say, you got a buck. Because Deke was cheap. I didn't know that. You weren't supposed to waste 15 minutes in coffee cans trying to find the right bolt that fits in the car. Deke saved everything, and as much as he liked the fun part of it, he was there to make money also because he couldn't afford it being a Mason. If you look in Seekonk Speedway on the backstretch, the Cement Palace, them steps on the backstretch, Deke Estelle poured them. He was a Mason. He was part of Seekonk. He'll be part of Seekonk forever, the Astor Racing family. Well, on the dirt part, he's going to try Volusia County. He goes down there with a Volkswagen mini stock. And that in there in line, and this is one of his stories that he likes, he said they were laughing at us. The threads were showing on the tire, which they thought was going to make the car go faster. Well, at Volusia County, when they were all laughing, he said, hey boy, let them laugh. He got the cigar going. Wally Saliver's one that coined that, the little man with the big cigar. That was Deke. I see pictures right now. And it was one of Henry Red Barber, one of the stars of Seekonk. The next car was cut off. At the window, you couldn't see the face, but you saw the cigar. That was Deke. You never saw him without a giant cigar laced in the inside. Let me get back to Volusia County. He wins that the first night, and everybody's shaking their heads. The second night comes out, he's going away in this Volkswagen and shaking their heads. The third night, he pushes the winner across the line. The guy says, you know what, we're going to approach that sidecar. Deke goes around, he parks it at the start-finish line. The crew comes out with a toolbox and pulls the motor out of the Volkswagen and puts it on the wall. He says, you can keep it, we're going home. They looked at it, it was worth $200, the motor. And they said, no, take the motor, take the motor. They couldn't believe that a junk motor was making these records at Volusia County. Deke had his own ways. I mean, once the pro stock started and the tour started, he was kind of winding down, but he had an idea that he could win at Seacom Speedway with a 6-cylinder. And all the things lined up right for him, and without a late restart, he won the race with a 6-cylinder. He proved it to everybody. He told me that if he would have had a late restart, he probably would have finished 4th or 5th. But everything worked out for Deke. I'm so disappointed that he's not here today, and his daughter Deb is going to accept for him. In closing, thank you so much for having me. I asked Bruce Cohen, please let me do this for Deke because we're lifelong friends. Then he called me back. I said, oh dear, I'm getting disqualified for this. There's no way they're going to let me do this for Deke. But Deke is a personal friend. I spend almost every day stopping by and checking on him. And thank God for the 60s and 70s for me for racing, because I will never forget that era in time. And this makes me realize how important that era was to racing. Thank you so much. Deb, come on up. Lifelong friend. We got pictures of our dads holding each other as we were kids, and here's Deb.
Thank you, Steve. That was really great. I'm also very disappointed that my dad couldn't be here, but he's having surgery this week, nothing big. He's in great shape. He had an overhaul about 2 years ago. Triple bypass, valve replacement. He's good for another 50. He's going to outlive all of us. So he's doing well, and I'm honored to accept this for him. And thank you so much for recognizing his achievements throughout his life. And I wouldn't have wanted to grow up in any other type of family. I had such a great childhood. We'd be on vacations, no matter what state it was. People, Deke, what's going on? And we were all amazed that no matter where he went, everybody knew him. And I, like Steve, will never forget that era of racing, and I will always be a fan of racing. And Deke the 4th is coming soon. We have a Deke the 4th. So thank you so much.
There's a reason that Deke always had a cigar. After hearing Steve's speech, we know why. It was a victory cigar. I agree with you, Steve. The 60s and the 70s were the greatest era for racing, except I don't remember any of it. Our next presenter is The Voice, a Maine Motorsports, inducted into the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame. And if you were blindfolded and kidnapped, and you didn't know where you were, and all of a sudden you heard this voice, you would know that you were in Maine, except for one day a year when he comes to Connecticut to join us at the New England Racing Hall of Fame. Bruce Elder.
Thank you, Matt. Certainly a pleasure to be back for another one of these special Hall of Fame celebrations. And in particular this year, to have the honor of presenting one of Maine and New England's most accomplished racers, Mike Rowe. Well, it all began, or got started, when Mike got behind the wheel for the first time back in the late part of the 1968 season at Oxford Plains. He and 3 buddies bought a 57 Chevy for $8, $2 a piece. Talk about a meager low dollar start. Perhaps Mike may tell us how he and the guys raised money to fund this first venture. I think you'll agree with me, it's very unique. I hope he does. Well, by the spring, May 1969, Mike hit victory lane for the first time, and he was on his way. He's won features in every year since then, with the exception of one. That's 46 years. And when one reviews Mike Rowe's statistics, it's easy to get the feeling that his records might never be duplicated. I think you'll agree. Here's a quick rundown. 150 wins at Oxford Plains, all but 2 in the top division. 19 open competition wins at Oxford. 7 championships at Oxford Plains, all in the top division. Oxford 250 wins in 3 decades. Now only 2 other drivers have managed to win that prestigious race 3 times, and they are both New England Hall of Famers, Dave Dion and Ralph Nason. And the last one, he won the hard way, winning the last chance race, starting, I think it was 37th on the grid. 8 NASCAR Busch North Series wins, 5 while running a limited schedule from 87 to 89, making him one of the top 3 winningest Busch North drivers of the 80s. In 1990, Mike tackled the series full-time and won the second event of the season, serving notice that he was in the hunt for the championship. However, the loss of his dad caused Mike to miss the 3rd race of the season in Pennsylvania. Although he secured another win and finished runner-up in the standings, had he not had to miss that race, he might well have won the NASCAR Busch North Series championship in that year, while also winning his 7th Pro Stock championship at Oxford Plains that year. Well, the list goes on. A Wiscasset Pro Stock Championship, an American Canadian Tour Championship with wins at Thunder Road, Senea, Beech Ridge, and Airborne. A Northeast Pro Stock Association NAPSA Championship, a Path South Tour Championship. He's a 3-time Pass Tour 300 winner at Beech Ridge Motor Speedway. He has multiple wins at Scotia Speed World in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He's a 2-time winner of the Atlantic Cat 250 in Canada, and you'll hear more about that a little bit later. He's a 2-time Beech Ridge Pro Series champion and is a 3-time NASCAR Mainstay champion. Now those last races were with the Fowler family racing team, and that last championship, which was in 2013, was of special significance, and I think Mike will probably explain why. Now, in case you lost count, that's 16 championships. He was also voted #1 among the top 25 contributors to racing over the past 25 years of the Northeast Motorsports Expo. Believe it or not, there's more, but enough for statistics. I'd like to take you back to 1981 at the Beech Ridge Motor Speedway, because that's when Mike Rowe really made a believer out of me. Mike and his crew arrived at the Ridge with their Oxford Plains late model, which would now be called the Pro Stock, for the AutoWise 100, which was the biggest event of the season for that division. Now, I knew that Mike was the man to beat at Oxford, where he had already won 4 championships at that point, and I'd watched him routinely hang his car out over that negative camber on the front chute at Oxford that I know many of you have seen, serrated to try to keep competitors off it and thus out of the wall. And I thought again, well, he won't get away with that at Beech Ridge, which also had sloped toward the wall if you get off over the edge down the front chute. Now that 100 lapper had been determined to be run in a twin 50 format. And that turned out to be fortunate for Mike, because by lap 50, his asphalt car had literally shaken apart on the rough Beech Ridge dirt. He had lost his brakes, broken a shock, and the windshield had fallen in, cutting his right hand. I think most people would have parked it at that point. Well, after the 15-minute pit stop break, the race resumed with Mike beating out track favorites Jeff Stevens and Dick Walston-Hume. And Walston-Hume, of course, a 10-time track champion. But when the race finished, it was Rowe in victory lane. And by the way, earlier, he had won the modified feature that night in Dave Kutamash's backup car. Now, as if that wasn't enough, Mike returned a few weeks later to wheel the Kutamash modified in the Coke 100, which was the marquee event for that division. And there were a lot of heavy hitters in that. That always drew a crowd. One of them is going into the hall and was a great guy at Beech Ridge, and you're going to hear about him later on, and that's Jim Martell. Well, this time he battled five-time track champion Homer Drew. Better than 50 laps they ran side by side. But once again, when the checkered flag waved, it was Mike Rowe in victory lane. Now, not only that, he also won the regularly scheduled late model feature, again with his asphalt late model that you see that number 5 outside when you came in. That's a nice replica of the car, that asphalt car that he came down to Beech Ridge. So 2 visits to Beech Ridge, 1981. As far as I know, first time there on that unique dirt, and he claims 4 feature wins. Now, in all my years at Beech Ridge, and I have to confess, I've spent a lifetime there, over 50 years, I had seen a number of great drivers come in and struggle on that dirt, particularly on their first visit. And I know many of you know what I'm talking about. We have a number of great drivers in the Ridge who visited the Ridge over the years. So what I'd seen Mike Rowe accomplish had simply never been done before. Now, since those early years at Oxford and Beech Ridge, I've had the opportunity to see Mike race from Maine to Florida while announcing past tour races and traveling down south. He has continued to demonstrate a keen ability to adapt quickly to a variety of tracks and run up front at virtually any venue. Now, when talking with a number of individuals who have witnessed Mike's career, there's a common theme. They say such things as, he's determined, versatile, intense, has great stamina. He'll race you the way you race him, from several great drivers. No one drives deeper into the corners from a couple of car owners that I know well. He makes whatever he sits in faster, one of several comments I got from Ricky Craven. He raises the level of competition. He is truly a legend. He's humble and quick to give back. So there is a softer side of Mike Rowe. I'll mention one of several examples. I mentioned the Atlantic Cat 250, which is a very prestigious race in Canada. The Grand Marshal at one of those was a boy who was there through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Well, Mike won the big race, but he chose to make the day all about the boy, even to the extent of giving the youngster the winner's trophy. Well, clearly, it's difficult to fully capture such an amazing career, which still continues, still racing full-time. And I believe it's fair to say that Mike would be on everybody's short list of the best drivers ever out of New England. With that, I'll just add that Mike was honored with induction into the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame last April. And at this time, please join me in welcoming Mike Rowe forward to accept his induction into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame.
He's a better talker than me. I just try to get him to speak with me, but he won't. But I'm just going to make it real quick, because he did a great job, and really nothing else I can cover. I would mention about the 57 Chevy, though. When we first got started, he was right. There was 4 of us that got involved with it, and we had no money to get going. So one of the guys came up with an idea. He says, hey, look, we got a guy up here who wants a husk barn cleaned out. So we go up there and clean husk manure to get tires for the car. You see anybody, the young fellas, do that today? And another thing, you know, like he was talking about little Brian. Man, that was just great. You could have given that kid $1 million, and you know, he just loved it. But we gave him a ride in the race car, and it was just great to do that. We was up there driving for Steve Perry, but we're going to run some more for him. I'll make this short and sweet. Nice to see Dollar, Tom here from ACT. Great to see you. Back in 2009, I was driving for Dickie Fowler. We won that championship he mentioned, and you know, probably the highlight of my career, I don't know if I can say this, is we lost Jason, his son, in a car accident, and he called me up and wanted to know if I'd run the 2013, and we won that championship for him. It was awesome. And I want to thank everybody for coming, and congratulate all the inductees. Thank you.
pitch an idea for a movie for you. The 99 Faces of Dick Berggren. Because I think he has 99 different personalities. He has been a driver. He, along with two others, came up with the idea for the Spring Sizzler. He's been a writer, a photographer, the best pit reporter on TV and probably in TV sports history, a museum organizer. He has had just an amazing career, and people said he's retired. I watched an ARCA race this year on CBS Sports Network, and who was in the pits like he had been many times before, doing an outstanding job? Dick Berggren. So he is still very much part of motorsports, and he will have a different side of his personality right now. Hall of Fame presenter, Dick Berggren.
Thank you, Matt Buckler. If there was ever a driver who represented our sport with polish and the right attitude, Jim Martell, sitting over there. Gentleman Jim, his nickname says a lot about this guy. Some background. Jim owned and operated an auto repair business in the small town of Ipswich, Massachusetts for nearly 50 years before turning the business over to his son, Scott. He's the father of 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys, and the husband to the love of his life, Barbara, for 58 years. Barbara is here tonight. She's been battling cancer, took the last treatment just days ago, and we are so happy to see you. He has 7 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, and he'll be grateful to receive nice Christmas gifts from all of you this year, by the way. He'll turn a young 76 years old on the 10th of December. That same day, Bentley Warren will turn 74. We are marching on, aren't we? Jim Martell's racing career began in 1956 in a coupe at Hudson. He wasn't scheduled to be the driver, but, well, you know how these things go. It was the second race he had ever seen in his life. They started him on the pole of the heat, and I'll let you hear the story as he told it to me. This is a direct quote. "I saw the guy drop the green flag. I stepped on the gas, and off I went, right into the lead. Never took my foot out of it. Through the first turn, through the second, heading down the back chute, I'm saying to myself, this is a blast. I'll pick up the rest of the story. Reaching the third turn and still wide open, Jim hit the sandbank, launched into the air, and he and the car headed for the Merrimack River, barrel rolling. He was still strapped to the seat when it broke the wells that held that seat to the car. Jim was ejected through the floorboards, or what there was of floorboards, and when the folks went to the car to see if the driver was okay, imagine what they thought when they looked inside, and no one was there. Jim dusted himself off, walked away, and promised to try again. Few drivers can claim to have led every foot of the first race they ran for the entire distance they ran it, but Jim lived through that accident and can make the claim. In 1963, he opened a Sunoco station in Ipswich. In 1977, he built a garage that his son Scott now operates. It's on a little side street in a little town. People find it by word of mouth. It is a small town. And people talking to each other about a good place to have your car fixed is the Martell Garage advertising program. Retired from the garage now for nearly 10 years, Jim restored the supermodified that Ollie Silva drove to so many wins. He built a replica of the Nova that he drove to 2 championships. Jim restored Billy Murphy's number 8 supermodified. And he did considerable work restoring the Cadillac engine Model A body coupe driven by Don Lawler at Keene in the 1960s. He restored Skip Mansick's magnificent Hillegas sprint car, Crown 7, that was driven to wins by Gene Bergen and Buddy Krebsen. That is the red car that you saw on the way in here, and he did it right. There's no damn chrome on that car, and the body is just the way it came off the racetrack. It's a beautiful restoration. Jim Martell has saved a good bit of New England's racing history through the many old race cars he has restored, and through his efforts, those cars become treasures for all of us to enjoy. But Jim Martell is being inducted into this Hall of Fame today because of his own accomplishments as a driver and a car owner. He won in the cut-downs and Class A cars at Pines, Hudson, and Dover. He won in the Bombers at Peabody, and he won in the modified coupe at Lee. He won late model features at Arundel and Star. In 1970, he won a record 21 of 25 late model features and the championship at Star. And in 1971, he was again Star's late model champion. Against that background, he fit right in to the direct drive, fuel-injected super modifieds. He won in the short wheelbase snap special at Thompson, a racetrack with straightaways so long that a car like that with such a short wheelbase never should have even been competitive, but he won in it. He also beat the big block supers in that car at Westboro and Breyer. Driving for Skip Matzik in the Coke Sprinter, he won open competition events on the pavement at Monadnock and Star and on the dirt at Claremont and Beech Ridge. Jim Martell drove on 53 different tracks during a career that lasted 37 seasons, and he produced wins on 16 of them. Unfortunately, despite the effort that it takes to win a feature event, with so many of the others in this Hall of Fame, and despite all of that, there is no record of the win count. Let's just call it large, very large. He was there for son Scott during his career as a street stock and then a super modified driver. He was a championship winning father, wrenches in hand, teaching his son how the game is played. Jim has served as an ISMER vice president and a member of its board of directors. Look at this guy. Despite all that racing, he looks far younger than the birth date on his driver's license would claim him to be. And he's far more active than many others his age. Although son Scott bought the garage from Jim 10 years ago, on many days you'll find him out there in the shop being productive with his time. You'll also find him out in what they call the little garage. That's the garage that's just behind the house. And he'll be out there probably working on somebody else's super modified, just trying to make the car a little bit faster. Jim Martell is a racer, and I mean by that, a racer in the most complimentary way. He drove with class. He won all those races with skill and daring and not with his front bumper. He really is Gentleman Jim. Father, businessman, driver, coach to his son, husband, grandfather, great-grandfather, restorer, car builder, a racing champion, and now a member of New England's Auto Racing Hall of Fame. Jimmy?
Wow. Who was this guy you were talking about? He stole one of my stories, though. I was going to tell you about the first time driving thing, but I won't now, because he told you about things. I have to thank Dick for the wonderful job that he did in this introduction. I'm so blessed to have Dick volunteer that, and he put something together that was, wow, tore at my heart. I'd also like to thank the NEAR organization for this award, and I promise you that I will do my best to represent NEAR whenever, wherever I can. I also want to thank my family. My family really allowed me to do all these adventures. And I could write a book on the adventures, believe me. But my wife is the one that has to be pointed out. She's the one that allowed me to go do that stupid thing. I'd never even been to a racetrack. I had no idea. It was my first time. Dick said it was too, but this was the first time. And she stayed home, babysat, while I went and played. And she was the patriarch of the family when it come to that. She took care of me. She let me do all these things. She's a fighter. I love her. She's a good old girl. start a little bit with Pine Speedway. When I went there, and the people that I saw and remembered, Archie Archambault, Porky Kinsman, Buzzy Bazanson, Ollie Silver, all names that I grew to know and respect. They showed us, you know, what to do and how to do it. It was great. It was fun. It was an era that can't be matched. You can't get any better than the era of the 50s and 60s and 70s. Cannot do it. I just tell you, you can't. We ventured out from there. We started there, stayed there a little while because it took a lot of doing to get a race car and get it up there and even compete against these guys. But we got a few years in it, Pines, and then we decided to travel this long road up north to Hudson. We go to Hudson and we see drivers like Al Riley, Smokey Baldwell, Red Sequin. You really never knew who was going to show up at Hudson on the Sunday. It was like the last deal. If you had anything left from Friday and Saturday, off to Hudson they went. Places like West Peabody, Brookline, and a little old track called Dover. Dick said that it was good when you're making a speech to have a few stories. So this one Dick didn't get. It was a 35-lap race at Dover, and around the 25th lap, Freddie Schultz was leading. Right? And the hometown favorite spun out on the backstretch, Eddie Levitt. He was track champion, well known up there, well liked. He spun out. So they yellow flag, line them all up, single file. They didn't have the double file yet, couldn't count that high. And they just putting around waiting for the green flag to get thrown. They didn't give him a white flag warning. They just, when it looked okay, off went the green flag. Well, we all putted around. Eddie Levitt straightened his car out. He joins the back of the field. So now we come around to out of the fourth turn, and the day was very bright. It was very, very sunny. It glared right down in the driver's eyes. You could not see. You couldn't see the starter. You couldn't tell what color flag he was throwing. You couldn't tell if he was doing it. So Freddie was leading everybody down. He just kept going a little bit slower. Eddie Levitt, who's now going into the third turn, he looks over, he sees the so and the green flag and wonders why are these guys also going slow. So he passed everybody. He passed everybody, went back, and all of a sudden when Freddie saw Levitt go by and figured out something was going on and the race was on, he starts after it. He couldn't catch him. He had, only 10 laps to go. Levitt wins the race. They give him the checkered flag, and Freddie and the boys pull up to the start-finish line, and they get out, and they're all expected to be the winner. And a huge argument took place. Everybody ran out of the pits. All the Levitt fans come out of the grandstand down there, and they're arguing back and forth. Well, Freddie had enough. He said they weren't going to pay him. They were going to pay Levitt. Freddie gets in his car, and he drives it across the start-finish line and parks it. And then he gets out, and he made this big speech about there isn't anybody else that's going to win a race here at Dover unless I get paid. And he parked his car, and he got out, and he sat on the front bumper. And I have this vivid memory of Freddie, who was my hero too at the time, because he had number 14 and I wanted 14. But he sat on that bumper and he flashed the Freddie Schultz smile. Like, I know the family must remember that smile, because he was sitting there. He is not moving that car. They called a cop. Cop come up, looked at Freddie. Freddie told him the same thing. The cop just turned around, walked out, got in his car, and went home. It took 45 minutes, But Freddie got paid, and they had more races. Touch on a few memories that I have from that era. One being a place called Longy's Garage. I don't know how many guys would really remember that. You kind of had to be around. It was in Beverly. Longy was deeply into racing. He had a couple cars, one that Freddie drove, the other one Leo Cleary drove. And I worked just down the street, and every noontime that I wasn't out on a job doing something, I'd take my lunch and I'd go down to Longy's place and I'd sit up one end of the garage because I was a nobody. I was just a race fan and trying to be a race driver. But at any given time, you'd find Freddie would be there sometimes. Leo Cleary certainly would be there sometimes. There were just a lot of people. Trigger Watson, Nemo Alexander. There were a lot of people in that group. And they all met there at Longy's Garage. And that was the cars. I used to have to come to work on Monday and drive by 2 cut downs parked out in the street, still on the trailer because they raced someplace. It was the 14 and the 6. And that's an image that I wish I had taken a picture of. I never got to do that. The 70s through the 80 era was kind of filled with more stories, more adventures. One trip that we took to a place called Cemony Fairgrounds up in Canada, that was a wild deal. Thompson with the cut downs. Dick mentioned that we won with that Snap 6 car at Thompson. I want to tell you, I'm still scared about that car to go down. I couldn't believe it. But you had Fats Caruso driving, Gene Bergen, Norwood Arena. We had a big crash with Wild Bill Slater. Got our picture, not a picture, it was a drawing, cartoon type drawing, on the back page of the Boston American. Bill Slater didn't talk to me for over 10 years. Finally, we talked about it, laughed about it, and he was a great friend up until his passing. He was a nice guy. Lest we not forget Bugsy. The greatest guy going. Greatest guy going. Freddie DeSaros, Leo Cleary, Lenny Bowler. Just names that, need to be, every once in a while, they need to be said so that maybe it steers a memory. Trigger Watson, Joe Cass, Spider Lubinsky, LeBondi Brothers, many more. In the 70s, we had a group that got together and formed an organization, the NESRA Group, New England Super Modified Racing Association. Kenny, Russ, responsible for that, and they did an awful lot of work. They brought racing to New England and did it quite well. In the 70s, we had one of those miracle seasons that you have. You win a lot of races, 21 features. That was good. I enjoyed that. Our last story. Around 1964, we took a not so full coupe to Seacon, where they had full coupe races. It was close, it was cut a little bit, but they didn't say anything yet. They had a lot of cars. Seacon had the ability, when they had those special races, to bring a lot of cars. And you had heat races that could be features in most every other track. Well, I ended up winning my heat race and immediately got disqualified. Another big argument started. I wasn't going to sit on the front bumper of my car, though. It went on for a while, and it boiled down to the car owners and drivers and, getting together and talking about it, and you did a lot of things, but the vote that made the difference came from a local Seacon runner. A runner who stood up in front of the group and said, you should have disqualified the car before you let him race, not afterwards. He could have destroyed his car. You should have let him win. And that voice came from Pete Costello. And I wish he was here tonight because I wanted to say thank you. But I will say thank you. And I hope that whoever sees Deke will relay that story to him and tell him I said thanks again. I could go on for a long time with stories, but I'm not going to thank everybody that's here, everybody that's shown your support. I promise that I will give mine. It's been loads of fun auto racing. Auto racing has taken me to places and sites that I would never have been to. And I owe it a lot. And again, I say thank you to all. I hope I haven't missed anybody.
It's amazing. I finally met someone with more titles than Dick Berggren. I think the movie should be The 199 Faces of Jim Martell. And isn't it incredible? He and Bentley Warren have the same birthday. Should be a national holiday. Or at least that's what I'm going to tell my boss on December 10th. Instead of introducing our next presenter, I'm going to give you a sales pitch. If you go out to the lobby, you'll be seeing some great publications from Coastal 181. And there are books there about 9 members of the New England Racing Hall of Fame. John Fitch, Jim Jorgensen, Jim McGee, Bug Stevens, Richie Evans, Ed Flimke, Bentley Warren, Bill Wimble, and Dave Dion. You can get a Hall of Fame library tonight, and the person who's responsible, Lou Boyd.
They say that our lives are an interplay of purpose and chance. And if that's true, it could be said that our next inductee played that balance to perfection. A big man in physical stature, Bob Tasca was enormous as an entrepreneur, building one of the grandest automotive empires in the country. He was also one of the few, like Roger Penske and Bob Baer, who so embraced our sport, but was also able to accumulate great wealth. And he certainly did work the purpose, he certainly did work the word purpose. At the age 8, he wrote a school paper saying that all he wanted to do in life was become a Ford dealer. Later on, his dad, a struggling jeweler, said that he really ought to be a little bit more careful, get into something more worthy, more clean. But Bob's answer was, I'll make more money on Saturday morning than you make all week. And he forged ahead. Right from the start, in that one-car garage in Rhode Island, his business principles were number 1, hard work, number 2, obsession with quality, and number 3, customer service. And certainly an example of that approach was his courtship with Josephine Cambio. He sure worked at it. Befriended her parents, over to the house every Sunday, washed their car, took everybody out for ice cream. Family is purpose. And the couple had 4 kids, Bob Jr., Carl, David, and Tricia. And then there's the other half of the game. That's chance. Some people call it luck, but it's really putting purpose to work. Consider this. In 1957, Bob had his tiny little garage in Rhode Island, a Ford dealership, and someone came steaming in on a Saturday afternoon with an overheating Edsel. Bob took a look at that thing, knowing the guy was on his way to the Cape, and said, you take my personal car, let me take a look at that thing. So he spent all night long building a new radiator for this Edsel while the guy went off to his party. The next day, Bob and Josephine delivered it over the Cape. Well, unbeknownst to them at the time, The guy whose Etzel they happened to fix was Ernest R. Breach, who happened to be the chairman of Ford Motor Company. And within a month, Bob Tasca, Ernest Breach, and Henry Ford II were best of friends. And that lifelong relationship was the heart of collaboration. It was chance again in 1960 when Bob decided to give those kids a break and take them from their chores at the dealership and take them to the drag races at Charlestown. All of them were smitten by what they saw. And almost immediately, drag cars started popping up in the garage. That was because Bob had it in mind that he would use these cars as a tool to actually sell to the younger generations. Those drag cars were seriously fast, and they were tuned by an unbelievable line mechanic at Tasca named John Healy. Bob and his boys had quite the intense sense of competition, and that was demonstrated a few years later. One night, Bob and Josephine got an unwelcome call late at night. It seems that Carl had been out street racing, and it also seems that he had ended up in the Polky. So, Bob got out of bed, marched right down to the cell, walked up to his son Carl and said, "Carl, did you win?" "Yeah, Dad." "Okay, you can come home." And then there was a night that by chance, a local drag racer, a Chevy guy, named Bill Lawton, started doing burnouts outside of the Tasca facility. Well, Bob, at this point known as the Big Bopper, came storming out. And he went up to that Lawton and he said, "Willie, I'll tell you what, you come to work with me and you drive my cars, or I'll make sure you never win a race again." Well, it worked like a champ. That was the beginning of one of the most successful motorsports teams in all of American history. The 60s turned out to be just plain wild for Tasca Ford. They modified and raced Ford Super Stockers, those wheel-standing Cobra Jet Mustangs, and fuel-funny cars. Tasca almost seemed to taunt Ford into the performance industry. And most historians at Ford will tell you today that it was actually Bob Tasca who coined that famous phrase, "Win on Sunday, sell on Monday." By 1971, though, the economy was beginning to change a little bit, and exhaust emissions were getting to be an acknowledged problem, and race cars were getting specialized. You couldn't sell a drag car off your floor anymore, and so Bob gradually disbanded the racing operation. The relationship with Ford, however, continued to thrive, and Bob just traveled constantly. He was all over the country helping production and design engineers debugging various problems. And some little organization called the Tasca University trained literally thousands and thousands of Ford employees. And a clear example of that profound influence that Bob had happened in December of 1996. A guy named John Force happened to come into Providence, and so he decided he'd stop by and say hello to these famous Tasca people. Well, that led to a great Italian dinner, as you can imagine. And during the case of that, John turned to Bob and said, "Bob, you know, I need your advice. Things are getting a little shaky with my sponsor, Pontiac." Well, Bob said, "I'll fix that." And within 24 hours, John Force had his Ford factory sponsorship. In 2000, the grand opening of Tasca's 165,000 square foot Pontiac Avenue facility opened. It was a celebration of what the first and second generation of Tascas had done, and a celebration of the arrival of the third. This truly amazing facility has Ford, Lincoln, Volvo, Jaguar, Mazda, Aston Martin, and all manner of other brands. A decade later, Bob Sr. passed after a long illness. And the size of the funeral was such that, believe it or not, a section of Interstate 95 in Rhode Island was closed. But that's not where things ended. Go to that Cranston facility and nothing has changed. There's a clear bustle about the place, imbued almost with disarming customer friendliness. And let there be no question that these guys are selling and servicing 1 ton of cars. And the racing is back. Carl's still at it. A popular regular at New England Dragway in his Cobra Jet Mustang, super stock. Meanwhile, Bobby III was the first in the land in a Ford-bodied funny car to get in the 3-second margin at 317 miles an hour. And his boy, Bobby IV, began in his junior dragster at age 8. Nah, nothing has changed at all, because it seems that Bob Sr. just plain is still there. It's his spirit, his purpose, his chance that has built an empire and guides it still today. So, may Bob Jr., his brother Carl, and Mike of the 3rd generation come up for Bob Tasca and set induction in perpetuity.
Good afternoon. I'm Junior. He's the race car driver, and that's my son Michael. So we got 2 second and 3rd generation here. It's very humbling to be up here right now, to be a part of this event. I can't believe how special it feels. And we're so grateful that you thought enough of my father to consider him to be the Hall of Fame class of 2014. It's really special, and we'll never forget this day. My father would always say, in life, you might forget what someone did for you, but you'll never forget how someone made you feel, okay? And it feels real good right now, when I speak on behalf of my whole family, to be up here with my brother and my son to accept this from my father. He's looking down right now, and I'm sure he's got a real big smile on his face. Lou, you did a great job with this. I want to add a little bit to that Ernie Breach story. My father knew it was a prototype car, and but the guy didn't know that he was dealing with Bob Tasca Sr., because he was out back working on a car. So when they said to my father, you gave him a car, he said, but I knew his car was worth more than the car I gave him, so it didn't make any difference to me. And it was true that we delivered the car back. Hal and I, my brother David wasn't even born. Breach went to a wedding at the Cape, and they swapped keys. Never even saw him, I guess, at the gate. They swapped keys, took his car back. And about a month later, he wrote Bob Tasca Sr. a letter, not knowing that he was the guy that actually worked on his car, and he was, he had a great place, and he fixed my car. And don't forget to thank that fat mechanic in the back for what he did for him. Well, the fat mechanic in the back was my father. So from then on, he nurtured his relationship with Ford, and even though we have other brands now, we cut our teeth on Ford, and they'll always be special to us. Again, thank you all so much. I'm proud to be here along with my family. Thanks again. I want to say one more thing. I think my father's the first drag racer, because I know we're surrounded by a lot of guys that like to take left-hand turns. So we're proud to be parcel with you guys, okay?
Take a right-hand turn and induct their dad into the Hall of Fame and their grandfather. So only in the sport of motorsports can you go from being a fat old guy in the back to a Hall of Famer. Now I can't screw up this introduction because he's the chairman of the Hall of Fame Executive Committee and also the Selection Committee. So this has to be perfect. He's not just an executive. He's been a driver, a car owner, a promoter, one of the people along with Dick Berggren and Lou Boyd who have come up with the Spring Sizzler, a race that has not changed its name in 42 years. They got it right the first time. The racing bug met him at the Norwood Arena, and he has been a fan ever since. Bruce Cohen.
Thank you, Matt. Thank everyone for coming. It's a great title that I have. It doesn't pay well, but we have a lot of fun and do some hard work. And it's very rewarding to come every year and see a lot of people that I grew up with, people in racing, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful time. Today I have the honor of inducting Freddie Schultz. To describe Freddie, you could describe him as hardworking, hard driving, and loved to drive fast. Freddie and his late wife Becky had 7 kids, and some of the kids are here today, and Fred Jr. will be here, excuse me, except for his dad. Freddie and Becky were together. They had, like I said, 6 kids, 7 children rather, 6 girls and 1 boy. Freddie, like many other people in this Hall of Fame, was a Korean War vet. Leo Cleary, his good buddy, and a hard racer as there ever has been, in New England. The other day described Freddie as a good guy, good-hearted, tough as nails, and absolutely terrific to race with. Leo said his 2 drivers in the old cut-down days that he loved to race with was Fats Caruso and Freddie Schultz. Leo said Freddie and I were good friends, and they actually drove for the fabled Adolf Longy Blomberg, who Jimmy Martell mentioned today. And Leo drove the 5 car, and Freddie drove the 14. After the infamous cut-down strike at Norwood, when they were thrown out about 1960, Longy kind of got out of the business. Jimmy Susie, a friend of Freddie's, bought the car. The rest is history. They won everywhere. In fact, Freddie won 14 straight races between 3 different racetracks. He was one of the king of the cut-downs of those days. He won at Norwood, he won at Thompson, he won at Westboro, he won at Seekonk, he won at the Pines, he won at Hudson, and he won at Dover. Between Norwood, Seekonk, and Westboro, he has 41 recorded wins. There are many, many other wins at places like Dover, Hudson, and Pines that have never been recorded. Freddie was a very hard worker. He was a land clearer. Many of us who were around the old Norwood Arena and Thompson and Stafford would remember on many occasions, Freddie would show up at them after races covered with dirt because he had worked a hard day out in the woods clearing land. He worked hard, he played hard, and he raced hard. And for those who knew him, he was a great guy. At one point in his career, Freddie was running 4-5 nights a week. He said to me that the winnings from driving the cut-downs enabled him to buy his first bulldozer. Now, Jimmy mentioned about that little deal over at up at Dover. Freddie did, he was a tough guy and he was opinionated, and if you ran him hard, he'd run you hard, but he would never put you up. Well, one night at Seekonk, there were 4 or 5 drivers who incurred Freddie's wrath. And he went, you, and you. I'm not going to, finish the feature. He didn't. Freddie won. After the cut-downs kind of, phased out, Freddie went into the modifieds, driving again for Jimmy Susie. Other guys that he drove for were B.B. Zelensky, Tom Dunn. They won a championship at Westboro. Freddie won the last championship at Norwood Arena for the modifieds, driving for Dick Armstrong. Freddie, although never saw the headlines or the big time, was a great Saturday night racer. And as Bones Borsia once wrote, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a privilege and an honor to induct Freddie Schultz, a racer's race, into the Hall of Fame, and accepting will be his son, Freddie Jr. And here comes some other Schultz children.
Okay, my name is Jenna Schultz. Hello, everyone. I'm one of Fred Schultz's daughters. And I'll probably repeat some of what Bruce Cohen mentioned, but that's okay. I'm here with my family to honor our father being inducted into the Racing Hall of Fame. His racing career spanned over 3 decades, from 1947 to 1980. He raced until he was 50 years old. And he was the champion at Norwood Arena in 1969 and Westboro Speedway in 1978. Our father was a very competitive man with a big heart, and as Jimmy Martell mentioned, and a big smile. He started racing as a teenager, and he and his brothers wanted to build a racetrack at Mansfield where they grew up, but it never happened. His father built a pond for him and his brothers to take their cars out on the ice to race around. Two of my father's brothers, Paul Schultz and Bill Schultz, were also race car drivers. Our mother, Becky, was also a race car driver. The year I was born in 1960, my father won a lot of money racing. And together they saved their prize money to buy their first bulldozer, a Caterpillar G7. They built a very successful business, Schultz Brothers Land Clearing and Excavation. To this day, the business still exists and is owned and operated by my brother Fred Schultz and his son Mike Schultz. For as long as I can remember, we were always Dad's biggest race fans, and we were always at the races to cheer him on. And of course, we would go in and out of the pits, in and out of the clubhouse at Norwood Arena. We had such a blast. His love for the racing sport has been passed on to his children, 16 grandchildren and 22 great-grandchildren. When I was little, my parents put a child's racing helmet on me, which helped me win a baby contest. That showed how much they loved racing. He took care of his wife and 7 children, 6 girls and 1 boy. My brother's the youngest. He has 6 older sisters. And he even wanted to adopt some of their friends. That's how many kids we had in the house. He gave us everything we needed, from horses to vacuum cleaners to automobiles. We lived on 2 acres of land, and Dad gave us what we called junk cars. We weren't of age to drive, but Dad wanted us behind the wheel at an early age to prepare us. We would drive those cars around our 2 acres of land. But one day, Fred Jr. got daring and took off from the yard. So we lost our driving privileges for a while, but soon we're back in those cars. That's all we knew growing up, was racing, more racing. It's in our blood. In closing, our father would always say to us kids, if you want to drive fast, keep it to the track. Keep it to the racetrack. We miss and love you, Dad. You deserve this award, and we as a family are proud to accept it. Thank you to everyone that made this possible.
I am Fred's granddaughter. I would also like to thank everyone for their hard work and efforts of putting this banquet together. Thank you so much. And to say congratulations to all the other people being inducted today. What an accomplishment. I was a little girl, or not even thought of yet when my grandfather was racing, so I didn't get to see him race or have any first-hand stories. What I would like to do is share what kind of a man he was, and a couple of stories that I have heard, which are my favorites out of the bunch. From a child's mind. As a little girl, I thought my grandfather was a superhero. Watching TV, you see Superman in his cape with all of his powers. Spider-Man could shoot white webs from his wrist. And of course, Flash had speed, my favorite. My grandfather moved dirt that shaped our lands and changed our earth. He pulled vegetables from the ground, which I always thought was magic, and was fast and furious on the tracks and had the love of a giant. His cape was invisible to most, but not to me and his family. He always taught us to take pride in what we do and give 120%. To be honest and always give someone the benefit of the doubt. And of course, always get paid. And be good to your neighbors. I have a short story that actually has a point. It's a little off track and nothing to do with racing, but about him and his character and things that I've learned. Last year, we got so much snow that there was no way to put it. I live in a condo complex with a big parking lot. The storm that brought us 4-foot snow drifts was a challenge in my lot. Of course, being a Schultz, it was no challenge to me. But my neighbors struggled. My car was cleaned and moved in 20 to 30 minutes. As I looked around, everyone was still outside. I heard my grandfather ringing in my ear, "Be good to your neighbors." So I stayed outside for 4 hours shoveling out cars and moving vehicles. No one could get their car out. First I helped one woman, then I helped 2 to 3 other women. Then 2 men came up to me, yes, 2 men, and asked if I would help them too. They were calling me Mario Andretti by the end of the day, and it felt good, and I could see the smile on my grandfather's face. While I was playing in the snow that day, it reminded me of a story that a man told me the day of my grandfather's wake. I can't remember his name, but I am so glad he shared his story, which goes like this. It was the blizzard of '78. This man had plowing accounts, which included 495. He too was snowed in. He called my grandfather and said, "Fred, I need your help or I'm going to be in big trouble." So my grandfather fired up his bulldozer, plowing out people along the way and 495, and was glad to do it. That man told me that my grandfather saved him and his name in the community. Oddly enough, another favorite story is when he crashed one of his race cars and was in a coma for 3 days, and the first thing that he said when he woke up was, "Where's my wallet?" And of course, his wallet was there and untouched. I'm so proud to call him my grandfather and to share his last name. Thank you so much.
I really don't know much of a speech, man, you know. I don't know. I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you, Nia, for presenting my father in the Hall of Fame. And they very appreciate it. Thank you.
I learned one thing today. When my car gets stuck in the snow, and it always does, I'm not going to have to call AAA. I can call Fred Schultz's granddaughter, and she will get me home. As maybe Fred Schultz came covered in dirt, but he really cleaned up at the racetrack, as we have found out today. We have already met our next presenter. He was a winner of the Mitchell Rada Media Award. A lot of his books are on sale at the front desk. Some of the legends in motorsports he has written about, but I think calling him a biographer is a little inaccurate. He is the best storyteller in the business, and I think he has a few more to tell us this afternoon. Mark Bones Boussier.
Thank you, Matt. Hall of Fame driver Bug Stevens used to deflect credit for all his success by saying, "I'm just a jockey. The mechanics, they're the real stars." That was partly just Bugsy being modest, but it was also his way of acknowledging a universal truth, that no driver can do much without a great race car beneath him. Our next inductee built great race cars, all right, and man, did they ever win. Mechanical work came easily to Dave Turigny. He started tinkering with modified coupes in the late 50s alongside Rhode Island car owner Ralph Scotland. A 4-year stretch in the Air Force interrupted all that fun, but when he was discharged in the mid-60s, Dave was again traveling to local tracks with the familiar Scotty's 99. Most of us know him as the quiet force behind the gleaming white modifieds fielded by Hall of Fame car owner Sonny Casella and his wife Henriette, both of whom are with us today. Dave got together with the Casellas at the tail end of the 60s, and the combination was magical. The first 2 cars Turigny welded up for the Casellas, a coupe and a Corvair, were driven by Leo Cleary. Then the 70s dawned, and there came another coupe and a Vega. This was the start of the best years for the Casella 15 and for Dave. To truly absorb what Turigny's handiwork did across the 70s, just thumb through the record books. The victories and the championships leap off the pages. In 1970, the 15 Coupe, driven by Fred DeCero, won the NASCAR National Modified title. In 1971, with Bugsy Stevens, it won the Stafford Motor Speedway Track Championship. In '72, Bugsy won twice at Martinsville, a 250-lapper in March and a 100-lapper in April. 1973, by now steering a Vega, Bugsy won the Coca-Cola 200 at Pocono. In '74, the 15 won the Dogwood 500 at Martinsville. Closer to home at Stafford, Bugsy drove it to victories in both the Spring Sizzler and the Labor Day 200, and along the way clinched another track championship. In 1975, there was a return visit to Victory Lane at Martinsville in the Dogwood 500. 1977, Turigny and the Casellas unveiled a rocket ship in the form of a Pinto, powered by a small block Ford, a rarity in a sea of Chevrolets. It won 7 features with Bugsy that year at Stafford, including 4 in a row. That October in the Cardinal 500 at Martinsville, Bugsy lapped the field twice. That's just a sampling. Between all those major wins came scores of victories all over New England, New York, and Long Island. Bear in mind that by the end of that stretch, the modifieds Dave Terigny was building were nothing like those he'd started with. The early coupes ran on stock frames and carried parts you'd find at the local Napa store. By the 70s, every piece on a typical modified, from clutches to brakes to shocks, was a high-tech aftermarket item. As Dave says, in racing, if you don't keep up, you get left behind real quick. Dave never got left behind. In fact, like any great racing mechanic, he came up with a few creative ways to stay ahead. History tells us that in racing, the guys who write the regulations are seldom as smart as the guys who interpret them. The rules were printed in black and white. Mechanical wizards like Dave saw only gray. It made for some wonderful chicanery. One of the best stories involves Mr. Terigny doing some handy cut and paste metal work. Dave added a completely legal part number to a highly questionable intake manifold for a big NASCAR race. Bugsy went out and won it. When the inspectors tore down the engine, they carefully examined every internal part without bothering to take a second look at that deep breathing intake. After all, the legal part number was right there in plain sight. It was all part of the game, and Dave Terigny played it as well as anybody. When Sonny Cosella parked his equipment in the early 80s, we didn't see much of Dave for a while. Then Sonny's daughter Julie got mixed up with an up-and-coming driver named Mike Stefanik. Marriage followed. For the Cosellas, this meant a new son-in-law and eventually grandchildren. For Terigny, it meant more race cars to work on. Says Dave, once Michael showed up, it was like, here we go again. And boy, did they go. Behind the scenes is a sounding board for Mike and a reliable right arm for crew chief Sly Zabin. Dave was once again working on modifieds flying the number 15. Between 1986 and 1992, with Mike at the wheel, those cars won a Stafford Speedway title, 2 Spring Sizzlers, 2 Thompson 300s, a Pocono Race of Champions, and 2 NASCAR Modified Tour Championships. There were also 4 more trips to Victory Lane at Martinsville. Coupled with Bugsy's successes there, that made 9 Martinsville wins for Terigny. No other New England mechanic has seen as much glory as at that historic Virginia track as Dave. The ironic part is Dave may be the least glorified wrench in New England history, at least among the winners. Through the 60s and 70s, the last era of truly home-built modifieds, the most successful builders, the guys on anyone's mechanical Mount Rushmore, were Lenny Moeller, Bob Judkins, Bob Johnson, and this man Dave Terigny. The other 3 guys have been widely celebrated, mainly because their status as car owners for drivers like Eddie Flemke, Ronnie Bouchard, and Fred DeCero kept them in the limelight. Terigny went largely unheralded. As Bugsy Stevens once told me, quote, the guys in the pits, the other mechanics and drivers, they knew how smart Dave was. But outside of that small circle, he was an unsung hero. But you know, I'm sure that was fine with Dave. He didn't go for a lot of flash, said Bugsy. He was just a quiet guy who stood off to the side minding his own business. We'd win a race, and when Sonny and I were on the podium accepting the trophies and having our pictures taken, Dave would be walking around that car, checking the tires, looking everything over, unquote. Today, Dave, we're going to turn that around. Today, Bugsy and Sonny and the rest of us are the ones kicking the tires, so to speak, and looking things over. It's your turn to stand in the spotlight, whether you want to or not. In the eyes of so many in this room, you have been a Hall of Famer for years. Today just makes it official. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming into the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame, Mr. Dave Terigny.
Thank you all very much. I really like to thank the members of the Hall of Fame for my induction. This is really great. None of this would have ever been possible for me without the support of the Cosella family. They gave me everything I ever needed to build that car and to keep it running up front. And you know, nobody does this alone. You always need a good crew and a lot of help. And we've had that through the years with a lot of good people helping at the garage and at the track. Especially people like Gene Dow, who's always there to help. And, you know, over the years, everybody asked me, you know, who was the favorite driver you worked with? I said, well, you worked with Leo Cleary, Freddie DeCero, Bugsy, Kenny Bouchard, and Mike Stefanik. They were all great. They were great to work with, and I couldn't pick one over the other. It was a lot of fun, and they were fun to work with. And Again, I want to thank you all for the induction into the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Well, once you step into the spotlight, you stay in that spotlight forever, because Dave Turindy is a member of the New England Racing Hall of Fame. And Dave would look at a rule book and see a black and white rule and only see gray. I didn't know the 50 Shades of Gray was a book about auto racing until today. And Dave helped write it. Our next presenter is a member of the New England Racing Hall of Fame, but I think his number one claim to fame, he was one of the first writers for a daily newspaper, in his case, the Hartford Times, who featured auto racing in a prominent way and actually covered the sport. Now it's commonplace, but when this man did it, he was one of the first. Pete Zanardi.
You know, I've been kind of, excuse me, I've been kind of looking forward to this. Not that much. I actually figured by doing this I was going to get a little closer to even with my Portuguese friend, R.A. Sylvia. Because the guy's been helping me out since I worked for the Hartford Times, I think. But then I realized I could live to be 100 and not even come close to ever being even. And I believe that's true of everybody in this room. It's true of everybody that has anything to do with New England auto racing. We honor R.A. today as a historian and a collector. A one-time cadet division driver at Seacock. He's been collecting since the early 70s and now has close to 100,000 images. It's hard to conceive. Anyway. And he's got thousands upon thousands, you know, programs and trade papers, posters, flyers, trophies, record books, scrapbooks, whatever. But what has always made this proud Army veteran, this proud father, and this proud grandfather, what makes him special is his willingness to share that. Share that with anybody. And I can personally testify to that. Look at the Hall of Fame. Look at these plaques. We've now done well over 100 of them, and I'm here to tell you there is not a dozen that R.A. hasn't had a role in, that R.A. hasn't supplied information for or photographs for. And incidentally, that includes his own. We had to ask him for information to do his own. Now, when you talk to him, you got to put up with a lot of pride of his being a Rhode Islander. You know, he can't, whatever you ask, you're going to ask a question about Catamount, he's going to tell you that the first oval track and racing, his first oval track race was in Rhode Island, you know, but when you ask him, you know R.A. is going to get you an answer or try very hard to do so. He estimates he gets about a dozen inquiries a week. You know, stuff like, my daddy raced at Norwood in 1951. Do you have any information on him? That kind of stuff. He does that. He goes out and does that. And I think that's a little conservative figure, because a lot of competitors that I know, fans, promoters, obviously media guys, R.A. just continues to help. He saw his first race at Ponta Delgada Speedway in 1945, and I'm sure there's some historical significance to that. He'll tell us, I'm sure. This guy's been a commentator, a writer, and he's presently a principal at Pro 9 Motorsports Museum in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Again, all of this stuff, I can give you facts and figures. What makes this man so special is his willingness to help you, to go out and find the answers for you. This sport would be less than it is if R.A. hadn't come along. This Hall of Fame, I think, would be damn near impossible if R.A. Sylvia hadn't been out there helping us seek the records we want. And as far as me getting even with R.A., not in a million years is that going to happen. Get up here, boy.
Thanks for that glowing tribute, I guess. Peter is correct, though. The first oval track race ever was in Rhode Island, 1896. But I'd like to start by thanking Nia for being in existence for 33 years. And 15 years ago, 14 or 15 years ago, and started with this Hall of Fame deal. And it's a good thing. It's kind of when you leave here today, you have a feel-good aura about you all the way around. And also like to kind of thank the Sellers family. I see the majority of them have left already, but they put in a good period of time keeping the club afloat and managed and all. And things don't always run smooth. We keep going through it. As you can tell, we're still here. I guess I got to thank my father for starting all this. When I was just turned 5, he told me one Sunday morning right after dinner we're going to take a walk. And that walk was about 3 city blocks from where we lived, and it was the site of the Ponte Delgado Speedway, which is an old soccer field. They put a 5th mile in around the outside before the war. I just came around in 1940, so I didn't know what was going on yet. But we walked down there, and I went in there, and I said, oh, wow, look at this. These little cars, they're pretty, they're fast, they're loud, they're noisy, they smell great. I said, this is for me. And to the point when they started up the following spring in '46, I got in severe trouble in grammar school in an arithmetic class. Instead of doing the addition and subtraction puzzles, I was drawing midgets and coloring them the right colors with my crayons till the teacher spotted it and confiscated them. And I tell you, I'd give you any amount of money today if I could find those. Tiverton didn't even have a landfill then, so I can't go digging. But my father and I, we got going around to different racetracks, and actually Di Costello, the only race that my father's car ever won at West Peabody, and he drove for my father there. They kind of met there, and we're from the same area, so Deke took it around and got him a win, and we were kind of happy that night. And that was it for that. And but I always felt, as I got into my teens, that getting interested in the history of racing and the people that kind of, well, you know, we're from Rhode Island, a small state. We kind of feel picked upon, and I find little tidbits about that first race in 1896, and generally it wasn't known to the racing public, or never mind the general public, and I felt we got the short shrift, and I didn't take too much action on it. It was the 50s, rock and roll was in, I got my license, you know, music, cars, girls, having fun. Ended up going in the Army when I was 17, and got out, got married, and built a race car somewhere together, and I have a lovely daughter, and she's over here with us today. And I told her I was going into this induction ceremony, and ironically it was on her birthday. She made me promise I wouldn't mention it, so I'm not going to. Told you I'd get you. So I drove for a couple of years at Seacock, and another thing that stuck in my mind, in '55 I had a subscription to Illustrated Speedway News, and there was a story in Speed Age magazine about the history of AAA champ car racing, which became Indy cars as we know them today, by Russ Catlin, a famous writer. And I was reading through there, and I found out in 1915 there was an Indianapolis car race in Providence on a mile track. And where we lived, I could look over the bay and see Providence. I said, wow, the Indy cars were here like a few years ago. And nobody seemed to know it. It was there in a racing. But eventually I got around to checking that out. And Nick Tito goes over there and makes a little pilgrimage every once in a while. And I decided after I stopped racing, I started writing for Cavalcade of Auto Racing and several other magazines. I could use that as some history, and I had been saving everything I ever bought. And I wrote historical articles utilizing pictures I had. And that went on, and NEAR came into existence, and I kept collecting and kept going. And actually, pretty much everybody in here has kind of helped me one way or another. I borrowed a lot of scrapbooks, Bugsy's helped us out, and a lot of the other drivers.
And most of all, you people are my heroes, because without you doing what you did, who knows what I'd be looking at or interested in. And Rick Mariscal came along and bought the building for the Pro 9 Museum, and we moved all our stuff there together. And if you haven't been there, you should be ashamed of yourself, because it's anybody that's been there will tell you it's pretty good. And I'd like to thank you all for that, and I'd like to thank the Hall of Fame Selection Committee and all the people that voted on it. I'm just grateful to be in it. I probably feel somewhat unworthy, I don't know, because it's not attached to me what I do, it's just something I want to do. But most of all, I got to thank my lady friend Pauline for allowing me to drive her out of her house with many years of collecting. When Rick got the museum, think about it. Thank you. I'll keep you good for another year anyhow. When Rick got the museum, I moved about 18,000 square feet of sheet metal I had out of there. I said, oh, got golden for now, but stuff came in from somewhere and we're full up again. Oh, yeah. Don't worry about it. Keep it coming. Amen. And I guess that's about it. And I thank you all for having me here, and we'll keep on going.
Great t-shirts at the front. Hopefully you'll get a great souvenir for your day at the Hall of Fame. We'd like to thank everybody for coming and sharing an afternoon of greatness with us.